The shark is the oldest fear in cinema's horror catalog, a creature that existed before trees, that has changed almost nothing in 400 million years, and that the ocean keeps hidden until it is too late to matter. From a single film in 1975, an entire genre was born, one that ranges from masterworks of minimalist dread to glossy blockbuster spectacle, with at least one entry that puts a shark inside a tornado, which tells you something about how large the tent has grown. Today we are counting down our picks for the top 20 best shark movies of all time ranked. Let us begin. Number 20, directed by Anthony C. Ferrante, Sharknado, 2013. There's only one entry on this list that earned its place not by being good, but by committing so completely to its own absurdity that good and bad cease to be useful categories. A freak weather event deposits sharks inside tornadoes over Los Angeles, and the film accepts this premise with the same unblinking sincerity a more serious filmmaker might bring to a study of grief. Tara Reid and Ian Ziering play two people who appear neither surprised nor particularly troubled by what is happening, which is the correct response. Sharknado is a sci-fi channel production made for under $2 million that became a genuine cultural phenomenon, not despite its absurdity, but because of it, because there is a specific joy in watching a film that has decided it has nothing to lose and behaves accordingly. We would not ordinarily include a film rated 3.3 on IMDb on a best of list, but Sharknado is not competing in that category. It is competing in its own category, which is the category of films that make you immediately want to tell someone else about them. In our view, that is a form of success that this list would be poorer for ignoring. Number 19, directed by David R. Ellis, Shark Night 3D 2011. The final film David R. Ellis completed before his death, and not the one to use to introduce someone to his work. Snakes on a Plane serves that purpose more effectively, but a film that executes its modest ambitions with the professional competence the genre requires. A group of college students at a Louisiana lake house discover that the surrounding saltwater lake has been deliberately stocked with multiple shark species, and the film proceeds from that revelation with the brisk efficiency of a director who knows his audience and has no interest in wasting their time. Ellis stages the underwater attack sequences with a spatial clarity that many far more expensive productions fail to achieve, and the third act turn, that the sharks were introduced intentionally, is a stronger premise than the film fully realizes. Its primary weakness is structural. A PG-13 rating prevents the film from committing to the consequences that would give the horror genuine weight, and the characters are differentiated just enough to provide a counting mechanism for the audience, rather than people worth mourning. But Shark Night 3D is a solidly built example of disreputable genre filmmaking doing precisely what its audience arrived to see. In our view, Ellis knew his craft, and that understanding is what earns this a place. Number 18, directed by Sean McNamara, Soul Surfer, 2011. The only entry on this list in which the shark attack is not the horror, but the inciting incident, the 3-second event that everything else is a response to. Anna Sophia Robb plays Bethany Hamilton, the Hawaiian surfer who lost her left arm to a tiger shark at the age of 13 and returned to competitive surfing within a month. Soul Surfer is not a shark film in the conventional sense. It is a film about faith, determination, and the specific refusal to accept a diminished version of the life that was intended. Dennis Quaid and Helen Hunt play Bethany's parents with the warmth the material needs, and Rob carries the film's physical and emotional demands with a commitment the role requires, and she fully delivers. Its weaknesses are those of the faith-based sports drama. The inspirational arc can feel schematic, and the film occasionally prioritizes sincerity over complexity in ways that flatten what might have been a more textured account. But Soul Surfer earns its unusual position here, not because it is a great shark film, but because the attack it depicts was real. The life it changed was real, and the film treats both with a respect that exploitation of the same premise would not have managed. In our view, it belongs here. Number 17, directed by Sean Byrne, Dangerous Animals. 2025. The most formally unusual entry on this list, a survival horror that crosses the great white with the serial killer genre and finds, in that crossing, something neither genre had generated on its own. Hassie Harrison plays Zephyr, a free-spirited surfer abducted by Tucker, a shark-obsessed boat captain played by Jai Courtney with the committed menace that makes a villain worth the film built around him. Tucker's method is ritualistic. He lures tourists to his cage diving operation and feeds them to the sharks circling his boat. And Zephyr, more resourceful than any previous victim, is the variable he did not account for. Byrne, whose previous horror film The Devil's Candy established him as a director with genuine formal intelligence, handles the boat as a confined space with the spatial clarity that good siege movies require. And the film's best sequences derive their terror from the architecture as much as from the animals below. Its weaknesses include a second act that overcomplicates a premise already rich enough to sustain the film on its own terms, and certain plot developments strain the logic that the first half carefully established. But Dangerous Animals earned an 87% critical approval for a reason. It is better than its premise has any right to be. In our view, Sean Byrne is the most interesting horror director working in Australia right now, and this film is the evidence. Number 16, directed by Jack Shoulder, 12 Days of Terror, 2004. The dramatization of the 1916 New Jersey shark attacks, the real-world series of killings that 60 years later provided much of the historical foundation for Jaws. 4 people were killed and 1 seriously injured across 12 days of attacks along the Jersey shore, and the incident produced the first sustained public awareness of sharks as a danger to swimmers in American coastal waters. Shoulder's television film approaches the material as a procedural, following the response of local authorities, the medical community, and the press to something that no existing framework could adequately explain. And that register gives the film a grounded quality that distinguishes it from more straightforwardly commercial shark productions. Colin Salmon leads the cast with the measured authority the role demands, and the period recreation, New Jersey in 1916, the texture of a summer resort community confronting something unprecedented, is handled with more care than the television movie budget might suggest. Its weaknesses are those of the form. The restraint that gives 12 Days of Terror its credibility also limits its capacity to generate sustained tension, and viewers seeking conventional horror mechanics will find the procedural approach demanding. But as an account of the real-world events that made Jaws possible, it is a more valuable film than its modest profile suggests. In our view, the history alone earns it a place on this list. Number 15, directed by Peter Gimbel and James Lipscomb. Blue Water, White Death, 1971. The documentary that made Jaws possible, a film that Steven Spielberg studied closely before production began, and that established the visual grammar of the great white shark as a cinema subject 4 years before the film that would make that subject famous. Gimbel and Lipscomb's expedition to film great white sharks in their natural habitat produced footage that no one had captured before. Close encounters with unbaited sharks in open water, the first sustained sequences of a great white in motion, the specific way the animal moves before an attack, and the film's central sequence, in which the crew descends in underfloored shark cages with nothing separating them from the water, is among the most genuinely terrifying footage in documentary cinema. Its weaknesses are those of the form. 1971 documentary conventions can feel dated to modern audiences, more accustomed to contemporary production styles, and the expedition framing is more interesting as context than as sustained narrative. But Blue Water, White Death earns its position here as the film that taught cinema what a great white shark actually looks like, and that knowledge shaped everything that followed. In our view, a list of great shark films that does not include this documentary is missing the source. Number 14, directed by Martin Wilson. Great White, 2021. An Australian survival thriller that takes the oldest premise in the shark genre, a small group of people stranded in open water with something below them, and executes it with a physical commitment and a respect for geography that the premise demands. Katrina Bowden and Aaron Jakubenko lead a cast of 5 people whose seaplane has been destroyed off the Australian coast, and the film's central dramatic question, who will make it to shore and what will be left of them, is established efficiently and developed with the bleak logic of a film that understands how this kind of story ends. Wilson directs with a confidence that the modest budget does not immediately suggest, and the shark sequences, though limited by resources, are staged with enough practical clarity to generate the tension they require. Great White's weaknesses are those of a film working at the edges of what its production can sustain. Certain sequences cannot fully deliver the scale they require, and the characterization operates at the functional level the genre typically provides, rather than the specific level that elevates it. But as a lean, effective survival horror, set in the Australian open ocean, a body of water that does not require embellishment to be frightening, Great White does its job with craft. In our view, that is sufficient for a place here. Number 13, directed by Johannes Roberts. 47 Meters Down, Uncaged, 2019. The sequel that improves on its predecessor in one specific and important respect. Rather than confining the action to 2 women inside a shark cage, Roberts expands the geography to an underwater cave system beneath a Mayan ruin, and the spatial complexity of that environment generates a different and more sustained variety of dread. 4 teenage girls on a diving trip find themselves inside a labyrinthine underwater structure, navigating both the architecture and a school of great white sharks that have evolved to hunt in total darkness, blind, sensing their prey by sound and movement alone. The concept of sharks adapted to cave darkness is the film's strongest innovation, and Roberts exploits it with more formal intelligence than the premise might suggest. Its weaknesses are those of a sequel working within genre conventions already well established. The character development is minimal. The logic of the cave system is occasionally subordinated to the requirements of tension, and the film ends with a resolution that not all viewers will feel was earned. But 47 Meters Down, Uncaged is a more inventive film than its reputation allows, and the cave-adapted shark is one of the genre's more compelling ideas of recent years. In our view, Roberts handles it with real directorial instinct, and that instinct is what puts this here. Number 12, directed by Kimball Rendell, Bait, 2012. The high concept is exactly the kind of idea that produces either a masterwork of low-budget ingenuity or an expensive disaster. A tsunami deposits great white sharks inside a flooded supermarket, and the survivors, strangers with enough interpersonal history between them to generate conflict without much additional establishment, must find a way out without entering the water. Rendell, a veteran of Australian commercial film production, understands that the supermarket setting is both the film's greatest asset and its most demanding constraint. The geography must be established clearly enough that the tension makes sense, and the sharks must remain credible within an environment that is, by any rational assessment, impossible. The film navigates those demands with more craft than the premise suggests. Xavier Samuel leads the cast with the physical commitment the role requires, and the film's best sequences, the car park flooding particularly, demonstrate a director who knows how to stage action within a limited space. Bait's weaknesses are those of a high-concept genre film whose execution cannot always sustain the ambition of its setup, and certain sequences strain both the budget and the logic. But Bait is exactly the kind of film the shark genre needs, one that asks a genuinely new question and answers it with as much intelligence as it can muster. In our view, the supermarket premise alone earns this a place. Number 11, directed by Ben Wheatley. Meg 2, The Trench, 2023. The second entry in the Megalodon franchise took the unexpected step of hiring Ben Wheatley, a director whose filmography runs from found-footage horror to period comedy to political assassination, to direct a Jason Statham creature feature sequel, and the results are as distinctive as that combination of elements suggests. Where the Meg was content to be a cheerfully oversized shark movie, Meg 2 treats the megalodon as one element in a broader action spectacle that includes underwater corporate villains, multiple apex predator species, and a final act set on a resort beach that commits to its own chaos, with the conviction of a film that has stopped worrying about plausibility and decided to maximize scale. Statham anchors the film with his characteristic physical authority, and Wheatley's direction, particularly in the deep sea sequences, has a spatial clarity and tonal confidence that distinguish it from most franchise sequels. Its weaknesses are those of a production whose ambitions occasionally exceed its coherence. The plotting of the middle act is more complicated than it needs to be, and certain character decisions follow genre logic rather than human logic. But as a maximalist shark blockbuster that actually delivers on maximalism, Meg 2 is better company than its reception suggested. In our view, Wheatley's presence behind the camera makes the difference. Number 10. Directed by John Stockwell. Dark Tide, 2012. John Stockwell has spent more of his career making films in or near the ocean than almost any other working director. Blue Crush, Into the Blue, and Dark Tide form an informal marine trilogy, and that accumulated experience with open water photography gives the film a visual quality that its screenplay does not always deserve. Halle Berry plays Kate Matheson, a shark conservationist and freediver who retreats from open water diving after a colleague is killed, and who is drawn back into South African waters by financial pressure and a client who wants the closest possible encounter with great whites. The film's central sequence, a free dive without a cage, unprotected with real great white sharks, was filmed with actual animals using techniques developed with genuine shark conservationists, and the result is the most visually extraordinary footage in the film by a considerable distance. Dark Tide's weaknesses are primarily narrative. The human conflict between Barry and Olivier Martinez is more melodramatic than compelling, and the film's tonal inconsistency reflects the difficulty of combining a documentary-grade environmental sensibility with conventional thriller mechanics. The real sharks are more interesting than the fictional drama surrounding them, which is a problem the film never fully resolves. But the shark footage is the real thing, and in our view, that alone is sufficient to place Dark Tide on this list. Number 9. Directed by Jeannot Swark. Jaws 2, 1978. The most successful and most credible of the three sequels, and a film that has been somewhat unfairly diminished by its proximity to a predecessor that no sequel could reasonably have been expected to match. Chief Brody, again played by Roy Scheider with the specific anxious competence that made him the right protagonist for the original, is faced with another shark in the waters off Amity, and with a town, a mayor, and a tourist economy that have no interest in hearing it. Swark does not attempt to replicate Spielberg's direction, which is the correct instinct, and the film's focus on the Teenage at Sea ensemble in its second half gives it a coherent identity of its own. Less a film about civic responsibility, and more a film about youth and survival. The shark attack on the helicopter is among the most memorable set pieces in the franchise. Its weaknesses are structural. The first half is more interesting as a meditation on trauma and institutional disbelief than as a setup for the teen survival thriller it becomes, and the tonal shift between the two halves is more abrupt than it should be. But Jaws 2 is a genuinely competent genre sequel that stands on its own terms. In our view, proximity to greatness has obscured a solid film, and a solid film deserves acknowledgement. Number 8, directed by John Turteltaub, The Meg, 2018. The Megalodon film that Hollywood had been failing to make for 20 years finally arrived in 2018 with a budget that matched the ambition and a cast centered on Jason Statham, which is the ideal casting decision for a film about a 60-foot prehistoric shark that everyone said was extinct. Turteltaub's direction is classical in the best sense. The geography of each set piece is established before the chaos begins. The scale of the megalodon relative to its surroundings is consistently maintained, and the film's tonal commitment to cheerful self-awareness, without outright parody, keeps it in a register that most blockbusters struggle to hold. Li Bingbing provides a counterbalance to Statham's physicality with a performance of considerable charm, and the beach sequence, in which the megalodon arrives in waters crowded with swimmers, and the film delivers on everything it has been promising, is staged with spectacular confidence. Its weaknesses are those of a franchise-minded production. Certain plot threads are introduced primarily to create sequel infrastructure, rather than to serve this film, and the midsection loses momentum in direct proportion to the time it spends in laboratories. But the Meg is exactly as much fun as it's set out to be. And in our view, that is a more difficult target to hit than it appears. Number 7. Directed by Xavier Gens. Under Paris, Sous la Seine, 2024. The film that demonstrated more convincingly than anything since Jaws itself that the shark movie has the capacity to become a genuine popular event rather than a genre exercise watched by genre audiences. Jens's Netflix production, set during a triathlon in the Seine, in which a mako shark that has mutated to unusual size and developed an adaptation for freshwater, begins hunting in the river that flows through the heart of Paris, became one of the most watched films on the platform in the weeks following its release. The film's success reflects something beyond algorithm and availability. Gens, whose earlier work in the French extremity movement included Frontiers, brings a formal confidence and a willingness to commit to scale that the premise demands. The film does not pretend that its setup is scientifically plausible. It does not pretend about anything, and this clarity of intent gives it a particular energy that self-conscious genre films cannot manufacture. Its weaknesses lie in a screenplay that sacrifices character depth for narrative momentum, and a final act that some viewers will find more apocalyptic than the film has fully earned. But Under Paris is the shark movie that a generation of streaming audiences made into a cultural moment. In our view, that conversation is worth being part of, and Gens had the craft to deserve it. Number 6, directed by Johannes Roberts, 47 Meters Down, 2017. The most formally pure claustrophobia experiment in the shark genre, a film that takes two sisters, two shark cages, and 47 meters of ocean between the surface and the seabed, and derives 90 minutes of sustained dread from that geometry without once allowing the audience to feel that the formula is being padded. Mandy Moore and Claire Holt play the sisters with a sibling chemistry that the film's survival logic demands. Two different approaches to panic, two different capacities for problem solving, one limited air supply. And Johannes Roberts directs the underwater sequences with a spatial clarity that transforms the familiar constraint of low visibility into an active instrument of terror. The shark attacks are earned rather than arbitrary. The film's understanding of when to show the shark and when to suggest it reflects a formal intelligence that most creature features lack. Its weaknesses are those of a film that keeps its focus so narrow that certain viewers will find the premise wearing thin in the second half, and the final act twist has divided audiences along lines of genre expectation rather than dramatic satisfaction. But 47 Meters Down is the rare shark film that achieves genuine suspense through architecture rather than gore. In our view, The Cage, as setting and as concept, is one of the genre's finest dramatic environments. Number 5, directed by Chris Kentis, Open Water, 2003. The most minimalist entry in the genre's canon, and the one that generates fear through subtraction rather than addition. A film that removes everything the blockbuster shark movie relies upon and discovers that what remains, bare and sufficient, is the most frightening element of the whole enterprise. A couple, played by Blanchard Ryan and Daniel Travis, are accidentally left behind during a scuba diving excursion in the Bahamas. They surface to find the boat gone and the ocean in every direction. And then they wait. Based on the true story of Tom and Eileen Lonergan, who disappeared from a dive group in 1998, Open Water is not a film about shark attacks. It is a film about the specific quality of terror that comes from being in a vast, dark, indifferent body of water with no rescue coming. The sharks, when they appear, are real. Kentis and producer Laura Lau filmed in open water with actual animals, using no digital augmentation, and their presence transforms the waiting into something more immediately urgent without diminishing the larger dread. Its weaknesses are those of a film of radical formal economy. Viewers who came for the Meg will find it refuses every expectation the genre established. But Open Water understands something the genre rarely acknowledges: that the shark is not the point, the ocean is, and it holds that understanding for its entire runtime without compromise. In our view, it is essential. Number 4. Directed by Rennie Harlin, Deep Blue Sea, 1999. The film that asked a question the genre had not previously considered: what if the sharks were smarter than the scientists trying to study them? And answered it with such gleeful conviction that the result became one of the most rewatchable entries in the entire category. A marine research facility in the middle of the ocean has been conducting experiments on mako sharks, using their brain tissue to develop a treatment for Alzheimer's disease, a process that, as a side effect, has dramatically increased the shark's cognitive capacity. The sharks, it turns out, have been paying attention. Thomas Jane, LL Cool J, and Saffron Burrows lead a cast of characters who function, in the film's merciless logic, primarily as a counting mechanism, navigating an increasingly flooded facility against opponents who have been planning this longer than anyone admitted. Harlan directs with a propulsive efficiency that strips the film to its essential mechanics: establish a character, establish the threat, deliver the consequence, proceed. The film's most celebrated sequence, in which it disposes of what appears to be its protagonist at the 40-minute mark, remains one of the great tonal sucker punches in genre cinema. Its weaknesses are those of a film that prioritizes momentum over depth, in every sense. But in our view, Deep Blue Sea is the most purely entertaining shark film ever made after Jaws. An entertainment this efficiently executed is its own form of mastery. Number 3, directed by Jaume Collet-Serra, The Shallows, 2016. The most formally accomplished shark survival film since Jaws. A film that takes a single location, a single performer, and a time constraint, and derives from those three elements a piece of spatial and dramatic filmmaking that the genre had not seen since the early 80s. Blake Lively plays Nancy, a medical student surfing alone at a remote Mexican beach, who is attacked by a great white and finds herself stranded on a rock 200 meters from shore with the shark still between her and the beach. Collet-Serra, a director whose genre work has consistently demonstrated more formal ambition than the action thriller category usually produces, treats the geography of the bay with a precision that functions as the film's primary dramatic engine. The distance to shore, the depth of the water, the timing of the tides, the structural integrity of the rock are all established with the care of a filmmaker who understands that survival cinema is an architectural problem. Lively carries the film entirely, and does so with a physical and emotional commitment the role demands, and she delivers without apparent effort. The shark's behavior is implausible by any biological standard, and the film does not care, which is the correct position. Its weaknesses are minor: a prologue that establishes character motivation more efficiently than elegantly, and a climax that tips slightly into the bombastic. But The Shallows is a very good film made by a director at the height of his genre intelligence. In our view, this is where the modern shark film stands at its best. Number 2, directed by Andrew Trocchi, The Reef, 2010. The most frightening shark film ever made that is not called Jaws, a claim we make with full awareness of the films that follow and preceded on this list, and with the conviction that what Trocchi achieved with a minimal budget, a small cast, and the actual Coral Sea is something that more resourced productions have spent decades trying and failing to replicate. A sailboat capsizes off the coast of Australia, and 4 of the 5 survivors make the decision to swim for the nearest land, roughly 12 kilometers away. One survivor stays with the upturned hull. The film follows the swimmers. Based on a true event, The Reef is constructed around the specific terror of open water swimming, the darkness below, the weight of the distance, the understanding that the surface is the ceiling and everything below is unknowable, and the great white shark that begins following the group is almost a formalization of what the water already was. Trocchi filmed with real sharks in open water, and the sequences in which the animal is visible beneath the swimmers have a documentary quality that no constructed effect can match. Damian Walshy Howling leads the cast with a physical and emotional presence the film's demands require. Its weaknesses are those of an extremely lean film. The characterization is sufficient rather than rich. The first act establishes rather than immerses. But once the swimming begins, the reef does not release its audience until it is finished with them. In our view, it is the most effective exercise in sustained shark-induced dread since the genre's defining work. Number 1. Directed by Steven Spielberg. Jaws, 1975. There is no serious argument to be made for placing any other film at the top of this list. Not because Jaws is beyond criticism, which it is not, but because it invented the genre, set its standard, and has never been matched within it. And a ranking that placed anything else at number 1 would be making a contrarian argument rather than an honest assessment. Spielberg's film follows the police chief of a New England beach town, the marine biologist sent to help him, and the obsessive shark hunter they recruit as they attempt to kill a great white that has begun killing swimmers off Amity Island. The production was notoriously chaotic. The mechanical shark failed repeatedly, forcing Spielberg to suggest the animal rather than show it, a decision that produced more fear than the shark's actual presence could have generated. Roy Scheider, Richard Dreyfuss, and Robert Shaw form an ensemble whose chemistry in the film's final act, Three Men on a Boat, Waiting, is among the finest sustained character work in American popular cinema. John Williams's score is the most immediately recognizable musical shorthand for fear in the history of film. The film created the summer blockbuster as a commercial form. It made people afraid to swim. It changed cinema. In our view, Jaws is not just the greatest shark film ever made. It is one of the greatest films in any genre, operating at a level of craft and emotional intelligence that the 50 years since its release have done nothing to diminish. That is our list. 20 films, one genus of predator, and 50 years of cinema trying to understand what makes the shark such a durable vessel for human fear. The answer, as the best films here demonstrate, is that the shark is never really about the shark. It is about what the ocean represents, what the surface conceals, and what we become when the distance to shore is everything. Tell us in the comments which placement you would argue with. Subscribe to Movie Blanket Club. We will see you in the next one.